The rescue crew found me alive, which apparently ruined their whole day. I know that sounds ungrateful, but hear me out. I had been sitting in a dead maintenance pod for 40 minutes, no heat, no food, and the most upsetting thing was that I had left my lunch back on the station. A sandwich, some crackers, gone. The emergency beacon was on, someone would come, and the worst-case scenario was filing the incident report on a Tuesday instead of a Monday. That was genuinely my main concern. I was not panicking. I was just cold, annoyed, and ready to get this over with. The ship was not one I recognized. Contract vessel, I figured, or some kind of deep-range patrol unit, because it was built in a way that made no sense for the kind of routes I usually worked. The airlock design alone took me 3 minutes to figure out, and the person who opened it was definitely not human, which was fine. I had worked with non-human crews before. Perfectly normal. What was slightly less normal was the way they were all looking at me. That particular face, the one someone makes when they find a bird that has flown into a window and cannot tell if it is still alive. One of them said something my earpiece translated as, "It is communicating," which, yes, obviously. I nodded. They kept staring. I said, "Hey, is there any chance you have food on board? I missed lunch." The one I noticed immediately was standing near the back of the airlock corridor, holding a flat recording pad the way a student holds a notebook on the first day of a class they signed up for by accident. She was clearly the one responsible for documenting whatever was happening. She had her stylus ready. She looked very prepared. Her name tag said something my earpiece rendered as Voss, which seemed reasonable enough as names go. When I asked about food, Voss wrote something down, then looked at what she had written, then held very still, and then crossed it out. Nobody else answered. One of the other crew members said something my earpiece translated as, "It is communicating," which I assumed was standard protocol. They brought me inside. Immediately, 3 of them started pointing scanning equipment at me. I stood there and let them, because there is no point arguing with people who are trying to help you, even if the help is slightly excessive for the situation. The scanners made a lot of noise. 2 crew members made sounds my earpiece translated as gasping. I assumed something in the scanner was malfunctioning. Equipment breaks. I knew that better than most. Voss was writing things down very quickly, moving her stylus in fast, short strokes. She looked focused, official, like she was determined to get this right. She had already filled a quarter of a page, which for a simple rescue pickup felt like a lot. But I was not going to question her process. The ship's captain came in about 30 seconds later, and she was one of those people who walks into a room and immediately owns it. Tall, very straight posture, uniform pressed by someone who took pressing very seriously. Her rank badge said something my earpiece rendered as Rel, which I noted and moved on from immediately. She looked at the scanner readouts, then at me, then back at the readouts, with the expression of someone who has just been told that the math they did correctly somehow came out wrong. I asked again about the food. She said, very slowly and carefully, that they would address my needs shortly. The way she said it reminded me of how doctors talk when they are trying not to tell you something. I assumed the food situation was complicated for some cultural reason. Fine. I could wait. The medic, whose coat badge my earpiece rendered as OSC, started in with procedures I can only describe as escalating. First it was more scans, which was reasonable. Then something cold got pressed to the side of my neck that made my left ear ring for about 10 seconds, which was uncomfortable. I made the face you make when you accidentally bite down on aluminum foil. From the corner of my eye I could see Voss still writing. She had filled about half a page. Her stylus was moving very fast now, small controlled strokes, like she was trying to get everything down before something changed. I had worked with people like that, very detail-oriented. You need those people. They are the ones who remember to log the secondary valve reading nobody else bothers with, and then 6 months later it turns out that reading mattered enormously. Then there was something that clipped onto my wrist and squeezed in a rhythmic pattern, like a very anxious handshake that would not stop. I looked at it. I looked at OSC. OSC was looking at the readout with an expression I can only describe as a person trying very hard not to scream in a library. "Is this necessary?" I asked. From somewhere behind me, Voss made a small sharp sound. My earpiece translated it as negative confirmation, which made no sense as a phrase, so I assumed it was a filing notation she said out loud by mistake. That happens too. I used to work with a guy who narrated his own spreadsheet entries under his breath. You tune it out after a while. The earpiece gave me back a translation from Osk that meant something close to, "Please remain calm, we are doing everything we can," which was a strange thing to say to someone who was already calm. I was extremely calm. I was annoyed, which is a different thing. Annoyed is what you are when you are waiting in a line that is not moving. Calm is the water the line is not moving near. I was both. Osk tried one more thing that involved two small paddles pressed briefly to my temples. I blinked a lot. It was like being lightly tapped on both ears at the same time, mildly unpleasant, the way a dentist visit is mildly unpleasant. You just sit there and wait for it to be over. Osk pulled the paddles back and stared at them, then at me, then back at them, with the energy of someone who has just tried to light a fire underwater. I stretched my neck to the side until it cracked. Osk flinched backward, nearly dropping the paddles entirely. I said, "Sorry, my neck does that. Occupational thing. I'm on my feet a lot." Osk said something. The earpiece translated it as, "How?" I said, "What?" The earpiece gave me "how" again, which I assumed was a translation error, so I let it go. I rolled the other side of my neck. That one cracked too. I noticed Rel had stopped typing. I glanced over at Voss. She had stopped writing. She was looking at me with the stylus held in mid-air, not moving, like a person who has just been asked to describe a color that does not exist. Then she looked down at her pad, wrote one careful word, looked at it, and crossed it out again. She flipped to a new page. Fresh start. Very professional. Rel was near the door now, pressing things into a screen with the focus of someone diffusing something, and every now and then she would look up at me with that same wrong math expression. Two crew members had drifted closer to the doorway, not threatening, just the way people crowd around a window when something unusual is happening outside. I was not sure what they were watching for. I was just standing there. I was not doing anything interesting. I mentioned, just making conversation, that I had been on my feet since 4 in the morning. I was working a double because Terence had called out again and nobody wanted to do the paperwork to bring in a temp, so it had just been me and a scanning cart and about 300 meters of conduit to check. I said it the way you say things when you are filling silence, the way you talk to someone in an elevator. I was not looking for sympathy, it was just the truth. I did not see what happened in the room when I said that. I did not see the crew member by the door turn slowly to the one beside her and hold very still. I did not see Osk lower its instruments and stand motionless, the way a computer pauses when asked to run something it was not built for. I did not see Rel stop pressing things into her screen and close her eyes briefly, the way people do when they are resetting. I did not see Voss stop writing mid-stroke, look at the half-finished word on the page, and then just hold the stylus over it without finishing. I was looking at the vent in the wall which was blowing slightly warm air. I had been cold for over an hour, and the ship was not much warmer than the pod. I shifted a little closer to the vent. Nobody said anything. I appreciated that. Some crews talk too much during a rescue and you end up having to make polite conversation when all you want to do is warm up. Then I mentioned the finger. It came up naturally, the way things do when you are tired and talking to fill space. I had been doing a manual seal check on one of the external joins about a month ago, and the coupling had come down wrong, and I had known immediately that the finger was broken. That specific kind of pain is very recognizable. I had stood there and done the math. The form to end a shift early required 3 supervisor signatures. 2 of those supervisors were on a site inspection, and the system had been running slow that day. So I had found the first aid kit, taped the broken finger to the one next to it, and kept going. It healed fine, slightly crooked but functional. I held it up to show them. It was a completely normal story. Stuff like that happens. You make a practical decision and you move on. Voss made a sound. It was not a word exactly. My earpiece classified it as an involuntary vocalization, which is the translation system's way of saying it did not know what to do with it either. It was somewhere between a question and a very small collapse. I looked over at her. She was staring at my finger. I wiggled it to show her it moved fine. She made the sound again, slightly quieter this time. I said, "It barely bothers me anymore. You get used to it." Voss opened her mouth. She looked like she was about to say something. She got as far as what my earpiece translated as, "But how did you?" and then she stopped. She looked at the floor, she looked at her pad, she looked back at me, she closed her mouth. Whatever the end of that sentence was, she had apparently decided this was not the time for it. I assumed she was going to ask about the paperwork process, because that is usually what people want to know when I tell that story. The form situation genuinely surprises people. What happened in the room after the finger story, I also did not see. I did not see the crew member near the back wall reach out and grip the arm of the person standing next to her, not urgently, just steadily, the way you hold onto something when the floor tilts. I did not see OSC set its instruments down with the very careful movements of someone not confident their hands were working correctly. I did not see Rel put her hand flat against the wall. Nobody said anything, which I took as a natural pause, so I held up the finger again and said it barely bothered me anymore. "You adapt," I said. "The body figures it out." The earpiece translated a sound from somewhere in the room as a voluntary continuation of function, which seemed like a translation error. I assumed they were talking about something else. I did not see Voss pick up her stylus and write one single line on a fresh page. I did not see her look at it for a long moment and then very deliberately close the pad. Not because she had finished, because she had decided whatever this was, it was not going into an official report. Some things apparently do not have a form. OSC tried one more procedure after that, something with a thin instrument and a soft green light that it moved slowly across my forearm. I watched it move back and forth. It felt like almost nothing, maybe a faint warmth. I found myself thinking about whether the conduit work would need to be redone if the pod incident got logged as an equipment failure versus an operator delay, because those two categories routed to different departments and one of them meant the follow-up inspection form. I preferred the one that did not. OSC finished and looked at the readout. Then it looked at me, then it looked at the readout again. It made a very small sound that my earpiece did not translate, which meant it was either below the translation threshold or the earpiece had decided not to bother. Rel was watching OSC the way you watch someone who is about to deliver news you have already half guessed. I did not know what news that was. Everything seemed fine. I was fine. A little hungry, a little tired, slightly annoyed about the whole situation, but genuinely fine. I said, "Are we almost done? I really would like to eat something." Rel said yes. Her voice was very measured, the kind of measured that takes effort. I said, "Great." And I sat down in the chair they had pointed me at earlier, and I thought about the incident report, and about Terrence, and about whether the crackers were still good or whether the temperature in the pod had done something to them. And at some point while I was thinking about all of that, I stopped participating in the moment entirely. I do not decide to fall asleep. It just happens, the way a phone screen goes dark when you stop touching it. One moment I was thinking about the crackers, and then I was not thinking about anything at all. I found out later, from context I picked up near the food area, that the crew had stood in that room and watched me sleep for approximately 11 minutes before anyone moved. I do not know what they were doing for 11 minutes. Watching, I suppose. I sleep with my mouth slightly open, which I know is not a great look, but it is not something I can control, and I was not exactly trying to make an impression. At some point one of them apparently went to get Rel, who came back in, looked at me sleeping in the chair, and then, according to later evidence, sat down on a bench along the wall and stayed there, waiting for something to happen. Nothing happened. I was just asleep. I woke up because someone was making a sound directly next to my face, which my earpiece translated as a sustained and very sincere expression of grief, and that is not a great thing to wake up to. I opened my eyes. OSC was leaning over me with both hands raised slightly, the way people do when they are approaching something they are not sure is safe. There were 4 other crew members in the doorway. Rel was in the corner. She was standing, technically, but she had one shoulder against the wall and she was looking at me with the face of someone who has just opened a book and found that every page is blank. I blinked. "Good morning," I said, which was not accurate but was the correct thing to say when you wake up somewhere. Nobody spoke. The room had the specific quiet of people who have been through something together and have not yet agreed on what it was. I sat up. My back was sore. The chair was not designed for human spines, which is not a complaint, it is a structural fact. I rolled my shoulders until something popped. OSC made a sound like a small pressure valve releasing. One of the crew members in the doorway took a half-step backward. I noticed Voss was standing near the wall with her pad held against her chest, not writing. She was just looking at me with an expression I could not quite read, not scared, not confused, something more like the face of a person who has watched a magic trick and cannot decide if they are more impressed or more unsettled. The pad was closed. The stylus was nowhere I could see. She looked, honestly, a little bit like someone who had been awake the whole time I was asleep, which seemed like an inefficient use of her time, but I was not going to say that. I said, "Do you have food? I am genuinely very hungry now. I will eat almost anything at this point." Rel opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. I looked around the room. The crew was very still in a way that reminded me of that children's game where you freeze when the music stops, except nobody had told me the music was playing. I stood up. My knee clicked. It always does that in the cold. Is there a commissary on this ship? Or like a vending situation? Honestly, anything. Crackers, whatever you have. I am not picky. Rel pointed. Down the corridor. I assumed that meant food was that way. I said thanks. The way you say thanks to someone who holds a door open for you, the appropriate amount of thank you for the appropriate amount of service, and I walked out of the room. I did not look back. If I had looked back, I would have seen Rel slowly slide down the wall until she was sitting on the floor with her knees up, not from sadness, not from drama, just from the particular kind of exhaustion that sets in when something you thought you understood has shown you, very politely, that you did not understand it even slightly. I would have seen Osk still standing with its hands raised, because it had not yet received a signal from its own brain that the emergency was over. I would have seen two crew members in the doorway looking at each other with expressions they would still be thinking about years from now, and I would have seen Voss open her pad one more time, not to write a report, just to look at the one line she had written before she closed it. I do not know what that line said, but she read it, closed the pad again, and sat down on the floor next to Rel, and neither of them said anything, but I did not look back. I was hungry. I found the food situation about 40 meters down the corridor. It was not crackers. It was something that smelled like broth and tasted like a slightly confused vegetable, and I ate 2 portions standing at the counter because there was no stool and I was not going to ask. It was fine. It was food. It solved the problem. I filed the incident report from my wrist unit while I was eating. Pod malfunction, beacon deployed, rescue vessel responded, no injuries. That last part felt important to get right, no injuries. Everyone was fine. It had been an inconvenience, not an emergency. I had filled out 100 of these. The form was the same every time. I submitted it, finished the second portion, wiped my hands on my work pants, and thought about whether I could get the rest of the day off, or whether I was already past the window where that would be worth the hassle. I decided probably not. Rel was still on the floor when I passed the medical room on my way back. I could see her through the open door, and Voss was still sitting next to Rel. They both looked up when I knocked on the door frame, with that same expression, like they had been waiting to see if I would reappear. I said, "Hey, what's the nearest station from here? I need to get back to work or at least tell someone where I am." Rel told me. Her voice was very careful, the way voices get when someone is holding them together with both hands. I looked over at Voss. She still had the pad against her chest, still closed. I thought about asking if she needed anything for her report, since I had given her an unusual amount of material to document for what was, officially, a minor service call. But she did not look like she wanted to discuss the report. She looked like she wanted to sit quietly on the floor for a while, and honestly that seemed reasonable after what must have been a long shift for her too. I said great, thanked them for the soup situation, and walked back down the corridor. That was it really. Pod broke, got picked up, ate some soup, went back to work. I put in for half a day's inconvenience pay and got it approved 2 weeks later. The finger I mentioned to them, the one that healed crooked, I barely notice it anymore. You adapt. I have no idea what those people wrote in their own incident report. I hope it was shorter than mine. I have a feeling Voss did not write very much at all.